Welcome. I'm Kevin Mills, the Vice President of Policy at Trails Conservancy. Welcome to our webinar on the Active Transportation Infrastructure Investment Program. Today, we're celebrating the release of the initial Notice of Funding Opportunity under this program, the first one ever. And we're going to give you some of our thoughts about what is in the notice, as well as how to be strategic if you're applying. What is the Active Transportation Infrastructure Investment Program? It's a federal discretionary grant program run by the Federal Highway Administration for active transportation connectivity within and between communities, and it provides for planning and construction grants. And in this first year, there's $45 million available. Next slide, please. So there are two concepts of connectivity in this notice. One is networks. So this is about connectivity within a community or a region. It's how walking and biking facilities can get you to different destinations within that community or region. Next slide. Then the other concept is spines. This is about connectivity between communities or even between states. What you have here on this slide is the grandiose example of the Great American Rail Trail, providing connectivity not only across states, but across the whole country. But of course, more typical examples of spines would be between any of the towns along that route, for instance, or to give another example, between Washington, D.C. and Baltimore. Each region has its own regional network developing. But if you were to, say, develop a multi-use trail that connects the outer reaches of those two regional systems, that would be an outstanding example of a spine. Next slide, please. So let's talk to a minute before we dive into the specifics of the NOFO about why this program is unique and necessary. So it is the only federal program that is both dedicated to walking and biking infrastructure. So your application would not be competing against roads, bridges, and transit or things like that, just against other trail walking and biking projects. So that makes it different than, say, the RAISE program, which has been a tremendous program in the right hands, but it requires that multimodal competition, and this one does not. The other thing is that it's focused on funding active transportation systems. It's about filling gaps in existing infrastructure, and it's going to be more concentrated, larger grants to ensure connectivity, and that does have it stand apart from how, say, a program like Transportation Alternatives is typically implemented at the state or local level, where limits on the amount of money have led to grants being maybe typically in the size of hundreds of thousands of dollars, while this, as we'll talk about, could be a $15 million grant at a single time, so a larger scale. So what we love about this is that it embodies a shift of treating active transportation as something that, well, let's give it some money and move it along, to it's essential infrastructure. We'll treat it just like we do road and rail projects, where you're asking the question, what scale do we need resources to ensure that this is a connected and functional system? So we see this as a critical advance in the policy of how we deliver funding resources to have maximum impact. Next slide, please. Okay, so diving into the NOFO itself, NOFO is an acronym for Notice of Funding Opportunity. Well, let's talk about eligible applicants. This is an easy one. It's basically eligible governments are who is eligible, and so they list the five types here that they have in mind, and it is notable that this includes both multi-state county and multi-state kind of opportunities. So one thing to keep in mind when there are multiple jurisdictions is that to be an eligible applicant, you need to have jurisdiction over at least one of the places that is covered by the application, right? So, but the project itself can be within or between communities, and within or between a community or a group of communities, and it can also be a project or a group of projects. So in other words, one of the hallmarks of it being about connectivity is you could have multiple non-contiguous segments in your community that you want to put all together, and that would be eligible. That's the idea of a group of projects here. Okay, next slide, please. All right, now we're going to dive in the deep end, but with your favorite topic, which is money. So the $45 million is all but 1% is available for grants. The 1% will be used for administration of the program. There are two grant types. One is construction and the other is planning and design. You will want to specify which one you're applying for. And there's a range, given the totality of grants that'll be awarded, there's a range for each of these categories. So basically, roughly 25 million to 41.5 million will be granted as construction grants. By my math, I would expect 3 to 4 grants total given in this category. It could be 5, depending on how they line up. But I think that's more or less the expected range. There is no maximum grant amount, but FHWA expects the grants to be between $7.5 million and $12 million. I should explain all acronyms. So FHWA is the Federal Highway Administration, who's handling this program. So, but if you are in a low-income community, you could get up to $15 million in a grant with no match. And so to qualify for that, you need to show that there's a 40% plus poverty rate in a majority of the census tracts that are served by the project. And one thing to note about the construction grants as a whole is that they will include both network and spine awards. In the statute, it's specified that there at least 30% of the funds should be given to each. And so, so what you see in the notice is roughly $12.5 million minimum for construction grants in each category of network and spine. So for planning and design grants, the overall range is at the low end, 3 million, that's specified by statute as a minimum, all the way up to 19.62 million. But I think we'll see it land somewhere between those two. And we can expect many more grants to be in this category than the construction category. It's a minimum size of 100,000, and there's no maximum, but Federal Highway said that they expect the biggest one to be no more than 2 million. Next slide, please. All right, so we have already been fielding questions from our friends on the ground about this set of issues. And so I want to dive a little deeper into the issues of grant size and match here to anticipate that others will have the same questions. And the key to this is that there's a term in there called total cost, and that's not the same thing as grant size. So the statutory minimum is $15 million for total cost. Federal Highway Administration's interpretation of total cost is that it's the grant request plus the matching funds. It's expected that the maximum grant size for this particular funding cycle is also 15 million. So what you see then is a number of scenarios for how construction grant requests and matching funds will line up. So if you meet the qualification to be a low-income community, you could make a $15 million request and have no match. If you request 12 million, the high end of that range that they noted, that would go along with a $3 million match, which is the 20% standard federal transportation project rate for state or local match. And then 7.5 million, the lower end of what they specified, would imply a 50% match rate. And we could talk about this a little more later, but there's an implication that providing a greater match could make a project more competitive. And you, of course, could have anything in between. All right. So the next, so this is where we get into the guts of merit criteria and priorities. And this is the key to how your application will be scored. In fact, the evaluators, I believe, will be instructed to focus on this section and may or may not really focus on other sections. So when you're writing your how your project will meet the merit criteria, you'll want to make sure it's a really complete story you're telling here. So the first one, maybe even first and foremost in a way, because it's the purpose of the program, is mobility and community connectivity. So again, you want to emphasize in your application, how are you providing access to community destinations or to communities as a whole in the case of spines? There's a lot of emphasis on transit. Of course, it had always been anticipated and in the statute as one of the destinations one could reach, but in the NOFO, you see it being emphasized apart from other destinations. And so any place where there are transit services, you'll want to emphasize how the active transportation facilities that you're seeking support for will enhance first mile and last mile connectivity to these transit services and help them work better for the community. You also want to note that this applies equally to spines. So whether or not your proposal is for a network or a spine, you will want to address, to score points, you'll want to address what its relevance might be to utilitarian uses. That doesn't mean there's any problem with there being recreational uses and the economic development that flows from that, but you will want to note any utilitarian values so that you can, run up the points in your application. Second thing is community support. You've got public input as part of this. You really want to see evidence that the public's been engaged and is embracing the project. And then leaders in local government showing a commitment to the project, to the overall efforts to make the community walkable and bikeable and what have you is part of this one. So the third issue is the commitment to increase walking, biking, and active transportation. That is, this program is helping build facilities that'll connect people to destinations, but whether or the degree to which they are used, it can be related to whether the community has been thoughtful about an overall approach that's going to encourage people to use them. So safety policies are a good thing to see. General policies that are supportive of active transportation, and a design of a community where they get a sense that there's it's going to be a walking or biking friendly place to be once you've made these improvements. Fourth thing is financial completeness. This goes to that issue of match that we noted before. One thing in terms of the scoring of the application to keep in mind is if you qualify as a low-income community based on the definition in the notice, then you will automatically get the highest score in this category, even if you're providing no match at all. But if you don't qualify for that, then it is noted that providing a higher match amount than the minimum 20% may give you a higher rating in terms of your competitiveness. Next slide, please. Okay, so these are the last couple of criteria are equitable development. So this refers to really two different things. If there's disparity in fatalities based upon race or income in your community, you want to be showing that this is intended to help address that problem. And then in terms of providing access to opportunities based on race, income, and ability, so that you're helping really people regardless of race, income, or ability. You're making sure that there's workable access to jobs, services, schools, etc. And then all of the above criteria relate to things set in the statute, and then added to that are DOT goals and priorities, which they name safety, access and equity, environment and climate, the economy, quality of life, and workforce issues there. Now, also interesting is that they've said, okay, among similarly rated projects, there were some essentially, I'm calling them tiebreakers, things that would get special consideration among similarly rated proposals. And one is that you're showing really strong connection to key community institutions. And within that, they say particularly schools. And then so safe routes to school proposals might be strong, score strongly. And then benefit for disadvantaged communities, of course, is threaded throughout is a high value, high priority thing to focus on. Thank you. Yes, next slide is timeline. So it's a 90-day notice. So the application deadline will be June 17th. And then the time for performance, if you do get an award, is that funds need to be obligated by September of 2026. Now, obligation comes in the case of a construction project after you've met things like environmental review requirements, planning requirements, and what have you. So that creates one deadline. And then in terms of time to performance, they are expecting to specify 2 years for planning grants and 5 years for construction grants. Next slide. So here are some hints. These are just a few things that I picked up reading the NOFO that I thought gave some hints to how things might be prioritized. One is that I think it would be helpful to try and document, even in an informal way, what the demand for the destinations you're going to serve are. So in the document, they speak of high demand destinations within a community or a region. And so I think that if you were to put some numbers and or narrative behind the idea that you're serving, the high demand, the places people really want to go in plain speak, that I think that could strengthen the proposal. Another is transportation value. So in the case of networks and for spines, they had the phrase built for active transportation, including sidewalks, bikeways, and trails. Now, the baseline statutory requirement and reiterated in the NOFO are, you're first looking at whether spines are connecting between communities. But then it becomes clear as you dig into the scoring criteria that that no matter which type of project you're building, they will give you points for speaking to the utilitarian uses of those facilities. And then third, a micromobility. Here's a case in which the hint here is that you probably won't be running up your score if you really focus your proposal around delivery of micromobility. It defines active transportation as not including micromobility, such as e-scooters and certain e-bikes, but the facilities may accommodate some micromobility devices. So wanted to note that, and it might, for those who have ideas like that, they might want to ask some clarifying questions of FHWA to just make sure you're clear on whether your project will be strong or not. Next slide, please. All right, so these are actually three things we predicted before the notice was published. And so I just wanted to revisit them, both to emphasize as well as to kind of check us as to whether these things turned out to be the case. So in terms of planning and design grants, we predicted that they would be inclined to give a fair number of those, given the that we have not gotten to the full funding level that we hope for this program in later years. And so that they can work with a lot of different communities by doing a number of planning and design grants, I think is borne out. Also, match and leverage, we talked about that some earlier, and it does bear out that there's could be an advantage to stretching yourself and showing ability to deliver a match that's beyond the minimum. And then phasing or scaling, this is absolutely directly addressed in the NOFO, where they say for scaled funding options, if there's insufficient funding available for them to support all the projects they want to support, they could look to applicants who've said, we've got this is how much we want, but there's a subset of it that we would be glad to take, and that would still meet the funding eligibility requirements and achieve program objectives and requests. And so if you were to specify, well, this is a fallback amount, but that still would achieve something meaningful, and we would come back later and do other aspects of the project, that could make you more competitive, because they would have options as to the level at which they fund you. Next slide. So why do you apply now? Well, first is you get a lot of money for your design, to design or construct your active transportation network or spine. And even if you don't get the money, what will happen is Federal Highways would give you some feedback on why, and you would be able to apply that to have better odds the next time when you apply. The other thing is, while the program is going to be competitive for sure, you can apply for multiple federal programs at the same time, and that's explicit in the notice. And all they do is ask that you state past and future intended applications, so that there's some transparency about that. And I think the implication is that they want to encourage people to come in the door, show what they're interested in doing, and with that gives them good information to plan for the future, to have internal conversations about where they might be able to support projects through other programs and things like that. So I think you can think of it as a little bit bigger pool than just the money on the table, with the June deadline. And then the third thing, coming from RTC's standpoint, is we really feel strongly that by applying, you're going to help propel the movement. We're working to grow this program to fully meet future needs and to accommodate active transportation connectivity on the scale we're seeing it all around the country. So if you apply with a quality project, you'll be helping in a really fundamental way in establishing that there's demand for this program and that this program is going to have really outsized impact for every dollar invested. That these are really high return on investment kinds of projects. And then if you receive a grant, you're going to be a shining example for the country. I'm sure others will do this as well, but RTC for sure will be telling stories, drawing attention to the first recipients of these grants to show why this is an important program. Next slide. So finally, I want to flag that there are going to be some more opportunities to learn. It'd be really important to put on your calendar April 9th, when Federal Highway Administration has a webinar for all potential applicants, where I believe it's at 11 a.m., but we can put in the chat a link to this. And they will answer all your questions. You also can submit your questions to FHWA in writing, and they will try to answer those publicly. And then there's another one on April 10th that's specifically for tribal governments. And then RTC is also going to offer what we're calling office hours for this program. And those will be both in the form of small group Q&A sessions, as well as shorter one-on-one office hours where you could have a conversation just alone with us about your project. And these will be available on a first come, first served basis. And we ask you to stay tuned for more information on the dates and specifics. I think we're going to aim to get out something about that later this week. And next slide. That means we're ready for questions from you all. I'm afraid I have to wake up my computer that's going to receive the questions. Actually, let me do this. Aha, yep. Okay, so the first question is, does this program have funding dedicated or allocated for future years? So the funding for this program comes through annual appropriations from Congress. It was authorized in the bipartisan infrastructure law at $200 million per year, but that's subject to appropriations. So to actually be able to issue a grant proposal, a grant request like this, that money had to be included in the yearly budget. So in fiscal year 23, this is complicated because that's passed now. The money that you're now seeing go out the door was appropriated. So whether or not there'll be future rounds depends upon our success in getting Congress to do another appropriation. So we'll be advocating for that. And as I noted just a couple minutes ago, you're coming in strong, with great proposals, looking for money through this program will help us in that advocacy. The next question is, as for a spine project between two cities, is only one government required as the applicant? In general, how to approach the grants with several jurisdictions and partners involved? You certainly could have a fuller discussion about this with Federal Highways, but yes, only one government can be the applicant for a project. They do have to be one of the governments that has jurisdiction over a portion of the project. And I think that there ought to be some kind of documentation of how the governments are going to work together to make sure that the project gets done. So collaboration between governments is encouraged, and there's both formal versions of that, as in saying the applicant could be a multi-county or multi-state entity, or it could be more informal, where community A applies on behalf of community A, B, and C, and they show that how A, B, and C are working together to make sure that they can deliver, because that's certainly part of the scoring as well, is is evidence that they're in a position to deliver the infrastructure that they're asking for the dollars for. Great. Does the planning and design category also require a 20% local match? Yes, my understanding is the answer to that is yes. Let me see. Then, does the grant allow some funding to be used towards administrative fees? I'm not sure the intent on that question. That one, it might be better referred to Federal Highway Administration, I'm afraid. And I will not be afraid to refer you to them. And now that we're into the nitty-gritty of the application, I feel like there are some things we would love to tell you about, how might you be strategic in your approach. But when we get to the nuts and bolts about how the notice is working, how they will evaluate things, we'll tell you when we feel like we've got a good answer. We'll suggest you speak to them when we feel like we want to make sure you get their correct answer for it. So, okay, on the website, it's they thought it said 15 million minimum for construction. Can you confirm that it can be lower or explain that again? Yes. So that is what I was referring to when I had the slide about the match and the grant size amount and clarifying that. It's a very common question we're getting, and it's understandable because it's a little confusing to hear that 15 million is the maximum and the minimum, right? But that's because there's a difference between total cost and between grant size. And so in the case of the overall program, the statute says the total cost has to be at least 15 million, but grants can be less than that. In this case, with the way FHWA has defined total cost, the difference can be the match. So that if you have you can ask for 7.5 million. If you have a 7.5 million match and still meet the minimum total project cost, you could do 12 million plus 3 million match and get the minimum project cost and what have you. So the answer is 15 million is both a minimum and a presumed maximum of the grant sizes that they'll give. And it's because of that combination of match and grant request. That's in the construction category only that I mean that particular size. Okay, next question, and this is a good one to ask because I know they'll be interested in it, is a benefit cost analysis required? And if not, what sort of alternative approach to benefit cost analysis would be convincing? So, what I will absolutely encourage people to have this as a conversation with Federal Highways at the webinar that they have on April 9th. But I will say that I have read through the whole notice and have not seen anything nearly that formulaic, I'll call it, or formal as the kind of cost benefit analysis you'd see in a say a RAISE grant. On the other hand, I think showing that at least in informal ways, that you've thought of this as a high impact project, one that would have a strong return on investment in some way, that you're serving key destinations and making sure that there's connectivity to those, and that has value to the community in terms of access to jobs and services and what have you. I think narratively as well as potentially quantitatively is going to strengthen. I think would strengthen your application. But the implication from just reading it is that they're not being as demanding or formal about what is required, probably because of the scale of the program. So again, one that I would encourage, and we also will probably reach out to the department and get a feel for how they're thinking about that issue going forward. All right, question is, can federal agencies submit applications? And they are not, so what I would say is they were not on that list of eligible applicants, even though it's focused on governments. and you certainly could confirm with FHWA, but it appears that federal governments would not be thought of as the primary applicants. However, I did notice that it said that whenever an applicant has work that would be on federal lands, that they need to have a cooperative agreement with the responsible federal agency and show that they do, so that they that in the evaluation they can conclude you have the authority to get the work done. So it does refer to that federal agency relationship in that way. All right, so next question is that can ATIIP be used for land acquisition or trail maintenance? So I don't believe that maintenance would be eligible, but you know, we do we think that's a very important issue, and one that we work very hard on the recreational trails program and on the transportation alternatives program to make sure that there's adequate resources there to help with maintenance. But in terms of land acquisition, that is explicitly one of the potential eligible uses of a construction grant under ATIIP. Let me see, are more coming in? I don't see a new one yet. Please hold. Okay, question is, if a trail is used more for recreation than transportation, is it eligible? My answer to that is, yeah, if you had a spine trail connecting between two communities, and you can show that it's providing, you know, viable, you know, connectivity to enable people to walk or bike between those places, then it would be eligible. And then the next question would be how competitive it is. And my sense of that is that you know, recreational uses and the economic development that flows from that is a good thing for sure. But to score points in this competition, you'll want to emphasize the transportation utilitarian sorts of uses of the facility as well. So I don't think that it's dispositive to talk about the ratio of recreation use to transportation use or what have you, but I do think that it's important to include the transportation uses of the facility as part of the making the case for your project. And you know, it's our impression from, you know, working with folks all around the country on trails is that just pretty much every trail is used for both recreation and utilitarian uses, and that it's just a matter of what the ratio is. But I would not worry as much about the ratio as making sure you do a good job of documenting what those transportation uses might be. All right, see if we've gotten some more questions in the meantime. Okay, what kind of public outreach methods should we focus on? I don't see a lot of specificity about exactly what methods, but what I will say, and it's important, is that it's part of the scoring in the statute as well as in the notice, that you document that there's been good opportunities for public input and that there's a strong community buy-in to the ideas. And I think even if you give special attention to the equity implications of that, thinking about whether as a proportional matter, there's at least as much attention to areas that are, say, you know, low income, or where there may be people of color populations that have had less access to such facilities in the past and want more access, and you're helping to address that and what have you, and that there's good embracing of those opportunities among those populations. I think that would make your application stronger. So, I would also note, as to the public outreach, that if you apply for a planning grant, and one of the eligible uses of that planning grant would be to conduct the public outreach to gather that input, so that if you were to come back in a later cycle and say, now I want a construction grant for the project that you initially funded as a planning project, you can absolutely apply for those resources to do a robust job of engaging the community. And it could also be things like design charrettes and what have you be, I think, among the things that the methods you could use. Right. Yeah, okay, so question is, if we have applied for a raise grant and are waiting to hear back, can we apply for this program for the same project? Would that hurt our application? What happens if we are awarded both? So I think that is why. I think the short answer is yes, I think you can. And the caveat on that is one thing I noted in my presentation is that they ask for transparency in your application about any place else you might be asking for resources for the same work. So you would acknowledge, we're applying for this because we know that raise grants are extremely competitive, something like 9% of awards in that program. So we're applying here because it's such a critical project for our community. We want to make sure we cover it some way. And if you provide that transparency that you're applying in both places, then the implication in the notice is that they're good with that, and that they will use that to have internal communication about where are they best placed to support this work if they are. So that's my answer to there. Is there application assistance available for rural areas? So what I would say is there elsewhere, there's been some thought at Department of Transportation about that challenge. The Thriving Communities Program is one where RTC is working through that program to provide technical assistance to a number of rural areas that applied to and were recipients of support through that program. And so that kind of assistance does exist to rural areas with USDOT funding, but it is not tie-barred specifically to this application process, right? So you can't go to Federal Highway and say, now I want you or anyone to, that you're providing, funding support to come and help us put together this application. They said explicitly in the notice they're not in a position to give case-by-case technical assistance to anyone for this SNOFO. However, they are offering these opportunities to interact with them through their webinars about the application. They're also offering to answer written questions and what have you. So clarifications and what have you, yes. Actual assistance in putting together the application only if you had applied and succeeded in being a recipient for that kind of help through a different program. Let's see if we've got some more coming in. Yes, so next question is, as a metropolitan planning organization, we don't own any of the infrastructure, but we would like to apply as the lead applicant to coordinate a spine connecting multiple communities. Could we be the lead on an application? The answer is absolutely yes. Metropolitan planning organizations are given as a prime example of a regional government that is eligible to apply, and what you would need to show to be, competitive is that you have, kind of the approvals and the access and you're in a position to succeed in executing the project if, working with your member governments, what have you, if you were to be successful in getting the award. So yes, that's absolutely anticipated to be the kind of scenario that this will support. And just what becomes important at that point is not saying, oh, wait, we own it, but here are the ways we're going to proceed. And we've thought it through, and we're in a position to to execute on this. Okay, are networks and spines on federal lands eligible for ATIIP? Can this funding be used to build on federal lands? So, yeah, yes, there is a reference in the NOFO to federal lands where it notes that the applicant should have a cooperative agreement with the responsible federal agency. So that's on page 11 of the NOFO, I believe. And it'd be a good idea to, if you've got that kind of proposal, to look more closely at that provision. Okay, the NOFO mentions tribes several times. What preference or special considerations will be made to accommodate tribal projects? Well, as I had noted, there will be a special webinar for tribal governments on April 10th. I think it'd be a very good idea for any interested tribal governments to mark that on their calendar and listen in and ask good questions that day and make sure you learn all you need to about those particular contexts. I also recall a provision in there about a specific tribal transportation program being able to be used, I think, as the match. So there are a number of references in the NOFO to both tribal programs and tribal governments, and it'd be a good idea to give it a close read and think about all those things add up to particular parameters for those entities. But I also think in any case where a tribal government could show if it met the low income criteria and because it was noted that there's going to be a kind of a tiebreaker advantage for communities that meet those criteria and what have you, that will be strong as well. But in any case, I think that event on April 10th would be the perfect place to dig in deeper for those entities. All right, we have time for just one more, I think. And let's see. All right, so the last question I see is, how do ATIIP grants differ from Safe Streets and Roads for All? So safety is a priority in every one of these discretionary grant programs for sure. I would say safety is the first reference point for Safe Streets and Roads for All. The work there should be done pursuant to a state's safety plan and really lead with how it's serving those terms. In ATIIP, safety is absolutely a high priority. It speaks of a safe systems approach. If you can demonstrate that this is part of making the community safer for everyone, that is a huge plus in terms of scoring points. But the first reference point is it's about connectivity. It's about access to opportunities. It's about connecting within and between communities. And as part of that, some of the benefits of that will be safety. So there certainly could be a project that could be successful in either program. If an active transportation infrastructure investment that helps with safety could work in either place, but the starting point, the reference point, is a little different. So with that, I think we're out of time, but if we collected other questions, we will be glad to try to answer those in due time in writing. We absolutely thank you for joining us today, and look forward to continuing to work with you on this exciting new program. Thanks.